Welcome to my presentation on the mythology of meditation. My name is Jamie Green, and I will be taking you through the mythology of meditation as it applies to Buddhism. I'd like to start off by saying a few words about what mythology is. Here we have Joseph Campbell, the author of The Hero with a Thousand Faces. He was a philosopher and a professor at Sarah Lawrence University and really became kind of the father of mythology and really brought it to life and brought psychoanalysis to it and really kind of went into what makes up a myth. And this quote is really a beautiful way of saying that no matter when or where or who is involved in a story, that story will then influence another story, which will then influence another. And it really makes life between cultures and eras really a living, breathing organism that is eternal and everlasting. And so he says here, throughout the inhabited world, in all times and under every circumstance, myths of man have flourished, and they have been the living inspiration of whatever else may have appeared out of the activities of the human body and mind. It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into the human cultural manifestation. So like I was saying, it's just a beautiful way of summing up the human experience through eons and millennia, centuries, regardless of when and where. It is all the same story. It all feeds in to the next story and is a really beautiful way that previous civilizations can inform the lives of current civilizations and then really move into the lives of their descendants as well. Really kind of mirroring the cycle of Hindu regeneration and reincarnation, that there is a birth, a life, a death, and a rebirth. All of that is really personified here in mythology. Siddhartha, which is the child of King Suddhodana of the Shakya clan. And this is an important mythological piece because Gautama Siddhartha would eventually become the Buddha and a central figure in Buddhism. Now, when the prince was born, he was born from his mother's armpit instead of by the typical fashion through a vaginal birth. He was born with a full vocabulary, ability to walk. He really was ready to enter the world. And with each footstep, a lotus flower bloomed from his feet. And so his father, the king, knowing that there was something inherently special about his child, called in his court's astrologers and had them kind of chart what his life would look like. And so these astrologers prophesied that this child would either become the emperor of the world, one of the greatest leaders ever known, or recede from the world and become a spiritual leader. Now the king, wanting his kingdom to flourish and continue to grow, wanting his child to be a great emperor, bought 3 palaces for this young prince and 40,000 women to keep the prince's mind attached to the world. Another way of doing this, the king forbade age, sickness, death, and monkhood from even being present in the prince's consciousness. All of the members of the court, all of the servants of the palace, everyone was young and healthy. The king wanted to do this to keep his son really tied to the pleasures of the world and really keep him engaged so that there wasn't any room for him to develop spiritually. Now, this was successful until age 29 when Siddhartha requested from the king, please let me go out into my city. And the king gave his permission. Up until this time, the prince is very engaged, as flowers bud and the blooms begin to fall. These petals are cleaned up before he even is aware that there is a stage of decay that starts as soon as something is born into the world. And so this being the case, he consents. He goes out into the city 4 times. And this is really beautifully illustrated here in this photo. We can see Prince Siddhartha in his chariot pointing towards these what he would have considered an anomaly the first time, and he sees a man who doesn't look like any man that he has ever seen before. And we can see this gentleman here on the left who has gray hair, and the prince says his hair is not even anything that I have seen before. And so he asks the charioteer, what is that? And he explains very briefly that this is someone who has aged. He returns to the palace kind of distraught, not understanding what's happened, and he goes out a second time. And this time he sees somebody who is ill. We see this person who is kind of on a crutch here. He's been injured, something that he had never experienced before. And so once again, he asks the charioteer, who explains to him, even more disturbed than he was the first time. And this continues 2 more times. On the 3rd trip out, he sees a corpse. And he is so distraught by this vision of someone whose life has ended that they immediately return to the palace, and he becomes even more bothered. Eventually, he goes out for a 4th time, his 4th and his last time, and he sees these monks who are reserved from the world. They're sitting under a tree. They're in prayer or extreme meditation. And he asks once again, what are those men doing? And the charioteer explains that they have withdrawn from society, and their life's purpose is to become closer to spirituality. And hearing this, the prince goes back and he asks his father if he can retire from the world, if he can go out into the forest and explore spirituality. And his father declines. He wants him to stay. He wants him to become this all-powerful emperor. And so the prince says, if you want me to stay, I need you to promise that I will never get old, I will never get sick, I will never die. And of course, the king cannot honor these things. And so the prince leaves under the cover of night, and we can see that here in this illustration where Prince Siddhartha is on top of his white stallion, and he's leaving everything that he's known for the past 29 years. And the mythology says that the gods who are in favor of the prince's enlightenment at this time in his life actually silenced the hoofs of the horse, and so he was able to escape without anyone being alarmed. And so what Prince Siddhartha does is he seeks spirituality. So he retires from the world, he goes to the forest, and what he starts to do is learn under meditation masters the art of meditation, and really how to concentrate and to separate himself from his current reality. And while he appreciates the meditation, he studies under these people for 6 long years, and while he appreciates the meditation, he's frustrated because even when he comes out of his meditative state, he is still tied to the suffering of the world. He still has cravings and desire. He still feels unfulfilled. And so having this weight on his soul, he decides to leave his masters. He's already surpassed everything that they can teach him. And so he leaves and he roams for another period of time. And he comes to see these 5 ascetic monks praying in this field, and he decides to study with them. They're doing something that he has never experienced. They're surviving on nothing more than a grain of rice and a drop of water a day. And so he sits with these monks for 6 years and really ties himself to the ascetic principles. But he finds that while he's meditating, he's unable to think clearly because his body is so deprived of the nutrients that it needs to really function. He's not really able to reach the height of meditation that he would like. And so he eats A woman wandering from a village nearby gives him a bowl of yogurt, and he eats and he feels refreshed and rejuvenated and able to really think clearly for the first time in many years. And the ascetic monks that he was with are horrified. They see this man who had, before this really bought into their program, and they're horrified and they leave. They're like, you know what? We don't want to practice with you. He comes to sit under a Bodhi tree, and he sits and meditates for 3 days and 3 nights. And his body is healthy. He's had that meal. He is sustained. The gods of suffering are trying to distract him. He's undeterred. He is so focused. He is so able to have that concentration that he reaches a kind of nirvana. He's able for the first time to really become enlightened. And that's what Buddha means. Buddha means the enlightened one. And so while he's in this meditative state, he uncovers the 4 noble truths and the 8-fold path. And Buddha will come to tell you that these paths were not something that he divined. It was something that he rediscovered, that was a part of the world for all of eternity, but that he had stumbled upon. His job was to stay. Brahma, one of the gods of the Hindu religion, comes down and implores him to stay and teach what enlightenment is and how that can really free the soul from the cycle of birth and life and death and rebirth. And so that's what the Buddha does. So while he was meditating, he had a vision of all of his past lives, recalling where he had been reborn. He saw the persistence of the person, both in its plenitude and paucity, multiplied through its continuity across eons of evolution and dissolution. So he saw everybody that he had been and everybody that he would be in all of the lives and every possibility in the universe. He had seen all of this. So the 4 noble truths that he divined or rediscovered during this meditation are truths that encompass or explain what life is. So the first noble truth is that life is suffering. As mortal beings, we are tied to expectations and desires and cravings and all of these things. And so our life is inevitably full of suffering. And he divines that the second noble truth is that suffering is caused by desire. The third noble truth is that there is a solution. And the 8-fold path, the fourth noble truth, the 8-fold path is the solution to suffering. And so what the 8-fold path says is that there is a way to live that relieves suffering. And so as we can see by this beautiful illustration here, is that the 8-fold path is a guidepost, 8 guideposts to tell you how to live without suffering in the world. And the first way is to have a right view. And then you need a right orientation or a right thought. Then you need right speech, right action, right livelihood, and it goes on to the end where you need right effort, right mindfulness, and right conversation. All of these are interdependent. You can't have one without the other. So going into these a little bit further, the right view means that an individual must accept and understand the 4 noble truths as fact. So you have to understand that life is suffering, that suffering is caused by desire, that there is a solution, and that the 8-fold path is the way. And once you've mastered that, you move into right thought, which means that you must live your life manifesting kind thoughts and really pursuing ways to drive out negative thinking. This then informs right speech, and that really is being impeccable with your word. Just as you have to be impeccable with your thoughts, right? There's nothing that is more negative than what you can do to yourself. And the same is for speech. So being impeccable with your word towards yourself and others is hugely important. You need to make sure that you're being positive, that you're lifting people up, that you're lifting yourself up. You're really giving yourself that spiritual footing that you need to then move into right action, which is choosing a life of nonviolence, choosing to live in a way that you are a kind and loving and a thoughtful person, partner, husband, wife, daughter, just a cultivates positivity in all of their relationships. And this moves directly into a right livelihood, living life as an honest and kind person, and having employment that improves the world. This then goes directly into right effort, where you welcome positivity into your life and you improve the world in any way possible. This then informs right mindfulness, which is where you are fully present in each moment. And that truly is what meditation is. And so by doing all of these things, being positive, being impeccable with your words and your thoughts, all of these things, being fully present in the moment, this leads to right concentration, which is when the human soul transcends distraction. It transcends suffering. There is no desire, there's no craving, there's nothing except what is in that present moment. And that's how we divine enlightenment. The Hindu mythology of reincarnation and a cycle of birth and life and death and rebirth, the same goes for the mythology of meditation. You know, the Buddha has become separated from his life of physical pleasure, and instead he decides to seek out enlightenment, and this starts with meditation. And through this meditation, he finds this way of really tapping into the spirituality of the universe, becoming enlightened, getting rid of suffering. And he finds this by meditating. And the way that he instructs everyone else to find it is by meditation as well. So meditation is not only the beginning, but it's the end as well. And I just think that that's a beautiful representation of what the mythology is. Mythology in general, just like the first quote said, it is what was, it informs what is, it informs what will be. It's a never-ending cycle of human relationships just really evolving over time and becoming an even more beautiful and diverse and eternal thing. And I just don't think that there's much more beautiful than that. Here is my works cited page. All of the information that I have come up with here can be found in these resources. Thank you so much for coming and exploring meditation with me. I hope that you have learned something. I know that I have, and thank you so much, and namaste.